Hello, Heather. I am delighted to have you on our podcast and to meet you. And I'd love to know what is the greatest challenge you are facing or have faced.
Hi, Julie. It's lovely to speak to you too. My greatest challenge to date is that my middle child, I have three children, a son of 29, another son of 20, but our gorgeous daughter, Lizzie, is 27 and she has profound and multiple learning disabilities. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. I don't know if it's useful for me to explain that a little bit.
I am familiar with it, but for those that may not be, do you want to describe for her in particular, Lizzie, what her disabilities are, what she can and isn't able to do?
Yes. So, I mean, only a small amount of the population have this. It's for Lizzie, and again, it's not probably politically correct to sort of list what people can't do, but if I tell you about her, that she's unable to walk, she's unable to talk, she can't feed herself, she wears nappies, and she has frequent seizures daily. So she's reliant on other people for every aspect of her care. And I suppose the most significant part of this disability is the profound intellectual disabilities. So she has no verbal communication. So it's people who know her needs and know how to interpret them and to respond to them in the appropriate way. So Lizzie was only 4.5 months old when she had her first obvious seizure. She was, if I use the word normal in inverted commas, she appeared normal at birth. She was difficult to feed though. She was my second child. I was due to relax and enjoy it. I'd had one, thought I'd cracked what to do. She was difficult to feed and I knew something wasn't right with her. I call it mother's instinct. I don't know. I just knew something wasn't right. I went to every GP with her. My parents even paid to go and see someone privately. And then at 4.5 months old, which I have the date firmly imprinted in my mind, August the 31st.
It's the time, the time before and the time after life changed.
Forever, yeah. And I was due to return back to work the next day as a hospice nurse, that very next day. And she had her first obvious seizure. And we took her to hospital. And, I remember saying, will she live? Will she die? Well, in that moment, and I even remember, strangely, I think, thinking at that time, oh, will I ever see her get married? Things like that in that moment. I think there was an innateness within me that knew there was a shift in our life at that time. And I remember writing in the hospital chaplaincy book, taking our little trip round, and I wrote, God help our daughter. I know life won't be easy for her. How I knew that, I don't know that. I did. And then I also should have added a postscript. I often laugh and say, God help us, because we're going to need some help with this new family and new journey that we find ourselves on.
So what's so powerful is that instinctively, maybe because of who you are, but also because of your experience as a palliative care nurse, that you knew the minute she had that seizure that your life was forever changed. And that at that moment you asked profound questions. Will she have the life that I expected? Will she love and fall in love and be married? And in some way you kind of knew that the life that you had every reason to expect for her was over in that moment.
I think so. And I think we thought we'd win the lottery. We got a boy and we were having a little girl. Yeah. And whatever you think, we do have these little, I don't know, moments where you think about
dreams.
The future. They're dreams, aren't they? Dreams, yeah. And they were shattered, I guess, not initially completely shattered, but I think it's a slow, steady dawning and a slow, steady realisation that life isn't the same and she isn't the same and her progress isn't the same as other children. Even though I'd had one child already, I remember marvelling at a group of children where one child could sit balanced on one hand and hold a cup in the other. I'm thinking, my goodness, isn't that clever? Taking it all for granted with my first child. But it was just being able to, had to keep carrying her into a room, couldn't sit her down. I think with milestones, the children grow, they change, you have something to look forward to. There's a lot of sameness in
progress.
Yeah, there's very little progress, and it's reframing what progress is, I think, as well.
So did she have a diagnosis? Is the seizures, is there a condition that...
Yeah, we don't have a definitive diagnosis. So with profound and multiple learning disabilities, the most significant disability is the intellectual disabilities, but that then can come with other physical disabilities, complex needs, and Lizzie doesn't have a definite diagnosis. We've had a few things muted and suggested. I think a lot of people, when they meet us, assume she has cerebral palsy, but we think she has a neural migration disorder, so cells in her brain didn't form properly, and we don't quite know why. I think a diagnosis changes everything, and it changes nothing. It opens doors to people. People can have some understanding, or you indeed have some idea of how life will pan out, but it doesn't change what we deal with and how we deal with it, really.
So given that you had this kind of sword that came down on your life in that moment, and you've had decades of caring for Lizzie and finding ways of, God help us, how you can manage yourselves. What is the thing that has been particularly challenging in loving Lizzie in that you do and caring for her when she has so many profound disabilities?
Gosh, that's a difficult question to ask. I think I'd have had a different answer had you asked me back at the beginning. I've got a different answer now. I was chatting before about I wrote Lizzie a letter when she was 16. And I recognise that I think a lot of it is grief that we deal with and learning how to live alongside that grief. I think it's been massive, and I think it's the keeping going, particularly now she's 27, and it's fights, if you like, fights for things, just for things that should be in place. Buggies, nappies, extensions, constantly explaining myself or opening up my heart to other people to explain who we are, and probably feel a little bit invisible, not heard. There's a lot of, particularly this day and age, people clamoring to have their voice heard, and people will say, I don't see myself represented. And I think for profound and multiple learning disabilities particularly, very much underrepresented. So even down to, like, say, for example, a play group in the summer holidays, and people go, yeah, we've got climbing frame and we've got painting and we've got, but can we change a pad there? No, there's no hoist. No, we can't do that. So very early on learned, if things become difficult to do, you probably just don't do them anymore. Separating ourselves, so my husband would take the boys to things and I would stay behind quite often. This feeling of being left behind and having your heart broken, really, by when your child is unwell. There was a little girl once at a barbecue went to, she's only tiny, and children are lovely, aren't they? She came up and looked at Lizzie. Lizzie wasn't that old then, and she kind of looked at him, looked very carefully at her, and she just looked at me and said, does she need Calpol? And I just thought, oh, sweetheart, if that was the only thing that could fix her, I'd be so grateful. And quite often I say, if love alone could fix Lizzie, she'd be up and running by now, because the amount of love. And sometimes all I could do was sit curled around her. At night she didn't sleep well, waiting for a seizure to happen. She'd be very irritable, and we knew she had to have this seizure. And all I could do was love her sometimes. That's all I could do, was just love her. And the difficulty of trying to carry on with the rest of your family as well, alongside these things.
Well, you say all I could do was love her, but loving her was her best medicine, I guess, because I can really kind of feel how, you're not represented. She can't speak for herself. You're often battling to speak for her. Often you're left behind, but also she's left behind. So there's a kind of physical presence of being left behind, but also the psychological space of being left behind, and how deep that loss goes, but how hard it is for it to be acknowledged. And how do you keep going? You said that, to both allow yourselves to be a family with two healthy sons and your husband and life, whilst there's this ongoing, relentless sounds too negative, but it sounds exhausting.
She's in her own home now, and that's a whole different conversation. That's been the most stressful time of my life, in letting her go. But I think I very early on realised, I listened to, there was a man on the radio, and he'd had a trauma in his life, and he talked figuratively that if I walk that way around this lake, I'll sink, and if I walk that way, I'll swim. And I consciously remember deciding to swim for my family. It was a conscious moment that I can't let these young people, I can't let them down, and I need to swim. And then we realised our wedding photographer was a great philosopher, because he said to us, you can't change the weather, you can only change your attitude towards it. So again, there's this realisation that we can't change this, we can only change our attitude towards it. That's difficult times, but I think acknowledging the loss and the grief has been massive and difficult, and that's not to say I'm not maudlin, and you know, we function very well, but I do think in acknowledging that I miss who my daughter should be. I love my girl with
Yes.
all my heart and soul, but I miss
Mm.
who I think she would have been, but she might not have been like that. She might not like to wear pink. She might, you know, would I have been a better parent? I look back, I think there's a double grief now because I'm sad for that young mum I was and what I had to cope with. I feel
Yes.
so sorry for her. I remember when my
Yeah.
daughter was a baby and I was going to my son's first ever little toddler group Christmas play. And I'm silently weeping over my sick baby's head. So never giving him that full attention either. And it's sort of having to raise your game all the time, have, you know, keep going and somehow find that inner resolve and strength, which I realise I do have, but it takes its toll all the time. And within all that, she's never getting better. So often there's a resolution to caring for someone, but she in fact her ability is worse. She used to be able to crawl and high kneel, and she can't do that now. 27 years of seizures and 5 concurrent anti-seizure medications at the minute. So, and then I think you go through spells of, initially it's a shock and disbelief, and then she went to a fabulous special school. That was amazing. I think everyone should go to a special school Christmas play because it is amazing to see the little
Mm.
ones with their wheelchairs all decorated, children singing and
Yeah.
signing, and it's beautiful. But I used to notice the brightness in my children's eyes compared to the brightness. You know, that there's always that gap, and it's somehow having to bridge that gap. And I think, yeah, it's just difficult to find those reserves at times. But I think by acknowledging the sadness of it, and then you can look for the positivity. And I'm so grateful for her for so many gifts she's given me. You know, I do. I value true love. I know what's important in life. You know, she's given me so many gifts. And just when she leans in and rubs her nose away as a way of communicating and looks at me, those big brown help me eyes, then that melts my heart. And I'm grateful for those things. Truly am.
Yeah. I mean, I feel as you talking, I've kind of traveled with you in so many different weathers of imagining and grieving the daughter you expected to have, who liked pink and went to dance classes and had a teenage strop and went out in the world working. And I think of my daughters or my granddaughters and how, you know, that is such an amazing gift of seeing them develop and grow into who they will be, and that you haven't had that.
No, I'd love to be able to say to her, "You're not going out dressed like that." You know, I'd love her.
Yes.
And when our sons brought a teenage girl home, and we both of us, my husband and I, would stand back and look at the table and think, "That's how we should look. That's our unit. We should have that teenage girl
Yes.
there." There's always someone
Yeah.
missing, always missing in our lives, really. And I always think, would I have been a better parent? Would I have been more tolerant? Probably not. I probably would have still hated crafts and still be a bit shouty at times and all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was something very profound in your kind of learning for yourself, which was that when you could acknowledge that this was an ongoing loss, this was a loss for life. You know, every day, I guess you have to deal with something else that is unexpected and painful, and kind of, you know, whether it's seeing a mother and a daughter walking down the street or because Lizzie's having a particularly bad day or whatever it is. But when you could allow yourself to acknowledge that, that gave a space, I guess, and the possibility of almost like this decision that you decided. I'd love to know about that moment, you decided, I'm going to swim. I'm going to change my attitude. This is the weather I'm in. I'm going to change my attitude. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I think it's not allowing it. I think it's that balance, isn't, like you very rightly say, it's a space between hope and despair. And that is that space for movement. But I'm saying this now, this has taken me years to recognise and acknowledge that. And I guess sometimes some of it maybe is down to personalities, how we all cope under. I've seen that in my work as a hospice nurse. Just because someone has a terminal illness doesn't mean they're going to suddenly be a nice person or change their personalities. I think
They
I get.
become more of the same, not less.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to become a victim. I think I do. I feel unheard and I feel aggrieved. So, for example, there's things like we have to do, like now she's an adult, although she's still a baby and an infant in her abilities.
Mm.
There's so many more hoops to jump through. All of a sudden, there's forms to fill in so we can be her deputy and manage her care. And I feel like saying, well, where were you with all these people, when she's beating her feet against the side of the bath and when she's having a bath, having a massive seizure, or she's not slept again for X number of nights in a row. Where are you all in your legalities then, and having to prove? And when we've already...
Yeah, you want to punch.
I absolutely do. And getting that right balance of appreciating that other people have problems in their life. So, for example, if friends are just coming to care for elderly relatives now, I have to realise they're new to that. And I can't go, hey, I've been doing that for years. I've been to appointments and this, that and the other. And it's kind of recognising where people are at and where I'm at, and that not everybody knows the life we lead. I well presented, I look all right, I'm fine, I live in a lovely house. But all the money wouldn't change things. And my husband often said he'd give his life to see her well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of your husband, I was thinking about the whole family, your husband, you and your two sons. How are you as a family have been impacted by Lizzie's... Is it illness? Do you call it illness? What is it? Her condition?
We just refer to Lizzie, but disability, I suppose.
Disability.
Yeah. I think it's definitely been a challenge. I think many people, if you looked at studies and reports, are not still together. There's many times I feel I'm not present for things, even just watching Christmas films with the boys. I come in at the last bit of a film because I'm busy with Lizzie or haven't seen it. But actually speaking to them now, as more adults, they seem okay. We've worked hard at giving a balance to them, making sure that they kept doing their things. I never want them to feel they're responsible for Lizzie or have to manage her care. They might have to oversee that she gets matching socks, maybe, with her outfits, but that they're never responsible. And we had a scenario last year. Lizzie had lots of difficulties, COVID and nosebleed, lots of things. Staff were off sick, and I had to be there. We're having an afternoon when my eldest son was bringing a friend back, and hadn't met this friend but knew of him, and I was really looking forward to the afternoon. Going to have Sunday lunch, wine, and didn't work out. But I briefly ran home for a second to say hello, and as I got back in the car, I mouthed to my eldest son, "Take me with you." Take me with you, like this. And then I went, "Take me with you." And then I did a big breath in and drove off to Lizzie's, and he sent me the most delightful text that keeps me going. I've saved it and I keep looking at it, about how he knew what that big breath in, what it meant, how he can only say how much admires and more of awe every day of what we do and how we've done it. So
yes. That's so moving.
So moving and so helpful. And because obviously you worry what impact that's had, but I guess that's been their normal. But I hope that what we've shown them is, when crisis or adversity comes your way, as it will for people in life, that we've shown them how to get up, dust ourselves down and move forward with it. It just reminds me a little bit in the film Love Actually, where Emma Thompson's character finds out something and then she has to have a cry and then smooths herself down and pats herself down and goes back out for the family and many times like that. Right. Okay, let's carry on. So I guess that's a gift, isn't it? Lizzie's given that. I know I've got resolve and strength, but I would change it in a heartbeat. For her to run, dance, sing, laugh, fall in love, I would change it in a heartbeat. And people often say, "Oh, I wouldn't change my child with disabilities." I think it probably, what factors into that, whether you would or wouldn't change, is how much your child struggles and suffers. Sometimes she just struggles to breathe. She's blue again. She's having another seizure. And whilst I look for lots of positives, I would change that. And also how much sleep you don't get when you're looking after a child with problems like that. The lack of sleep is really difficult to cope with. And then on the rare occasion when nobody was awake and it was just me, that would be criminal if I woke myself up. It's a constant uphill. But we do manage really well. I think, as I said to you, when Lizzie was becoming a young adult, that's the problem where you and every time you reach a milestone, it sends you back to the beginning feelings of when this first happened. How are we going to manage? Loss. How are we going to cope? What are we going to do? How's it going to happen? And strangely, in the pandemic, it was a familiar feeling, really. My life's going to be restricted. I'm not sure how we're going to manage. I'm not sure how we're going to be. That was familiar to me because I've lived that life for a long time.
Your whole life? Well,
yes, my whole married life,
What do you think protected you and your husband from not doing what other couples have done, of separating, and because the pressure is too great, the lack of time with each other, the exhaustion, the stress, the roller coaster of it. What do you think's enabled you and your husband to pull together rather than pull
That's a
apart?
difficult one. Love, I guess, the first instant. Love for each other, love for our children, love for our family, resolve, communication, good communication, and being able to acknowledge our sadness. I think it was difficult, particularly at the beginning. I mean, I think for about the first 4 years, I cried every day.
Yeah.
And I guess allowing each other to be upset. He ploughed things into practicalities when we had to do an extension on the house or build a ramp at the front. He was very much, that's his bit. He was doing that bit. And then as Lizzie got older, he didn't do as much physical care because I did work until Lizzie was 7 and our eldest son was 9. He had to
So
help
you
look
went
after them.
back to work as a
I did
palliative care nurse, did you?
a month later, yeah. I did, for twice a week.
That must have been a good move, no? To do something else? I mean, although it's still caring for others.
Yeah, I think hopefully it made me more empathic. Latterly I did a volunteer job for Macmillan. And without saying anything about my circumstances, I hope people could realise that I know what it's like to have your world turned upside down. I know what it's like to have the pause button pressed on your life where everyone else seems to be going around quite happily. And I think hopefully that helped. It was difficult at times to do that, particularly with no sleep, being up till 2 or 3 in the morning with Lizzie and then toddler son getting up at 6 and then going back to work. I don't know how we did it looking back.
The exhaustion.
Yeah.
So the big thing of her moving into her own home, you said that was one of the most difficult. What was so difficult about that?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, it's been the most difficult 5 years. We were lucky and privileged to be able to do it, in that our parents all passed away, all timely, and elderly parents, and getting some inheritance money, selling properties. We said to the boys, do you mind if your sister gets this money? So we were able to buy her a bungalow. So that's a massively privileged place to be, and adapt it. It was all felt very risky and how to do this, but it's been getting the right people around her and the right staff and the right care companies. That's been like a game of snakes and ladders. That's the only way I can describe it. One day we think we're okay, the next minute we're not, and we've had a particularly trying summer with staff difficulties. And again, I guess in the last 5 years, there must be at least 50 people I've explained myself to, who we are, what we're about. And then there's other forms to fill in, deprivation of liberty forms, a myriad of things that go on behind the scenes. So we have the worries of managing her house, caring for, managing staff, managing equipment, managing Lizzie's medical conditions. So it feels that at a time when we should be free, we don't feel that yet, because we are the team who look after her currently are brilliant. And the nurses who support that team are brilliant. But it's been a long journey to that. And I guess the nature of care means it will always be a little bit bumpy and a little bit up and down. We are lucky and privileged. And there's a sadness in it too, because Lizzie, we bought her own home and we did everything from tea towels to televisions. But she knew nothing about that. It would have been great to go and do that with her.
With her.
Yeah. But I think she's definitely familiar with her surroundings. Somebody said to me, "But does she know you?" And I said, she doesn't know I'm her mum, because she doesn't know what the word mum means. She doesn't know that. I don't think she understands the spoken word, but of course she knows I'm familiar. And everybody will observe me with her or say, oh, you could tell by the way her eyes lit up that she does.
Light up.
Yeah, she does know and love you. Yeah. That's a picture of her when she was young. That's when she was.
Let's see. Mm-hmm. Look how gorgeous
she was. So beautiful.
Oh.
She still is, but such a beautiful child. I remember putting my letter one day.
Child.
I was driving along one day in the car and this big voice shouted, "No!" I thought, oh my goodness, that's me. I shouted no. And I was like, how can the world be so beautiful? How can this child be so beautiful yet has such devastating seizures? How could that be? How could it be? But I guess why not?
And it's it is an unanswerable question. And that's part of what you're living with, isn't it? This sort of existential unanswerableness. And it brings to mind maybe a difficult question that you may well not want to answer, which is her life expectancy going to be within your lifetime, or you're worrying about?
Do you know that is
your
a difficult
life
one?
I do. Her care.
Yeah, I have to live forever. And I used to not be able to say this without crying, she has to die before me. We don't know. We don't know really what that is, because we don't have a definite diagnosis. We don't know. I mean, there's 200 sudden deaths a year through severe epilepsy like hers. She's on, I say, 5 anti-seizure medications, and she's just had a surgery for a device that helps with them as well. So we don't know that. Her background health, however, is quite robust. Although she's had a bad couple of years, she is a little bit brighter than she's been for a while. And that's painful to go. And it's difficult to feel like you're holding up someone's life. I feel like Lizzie's got lots of threads to her, lots of people involved in her life, but I'm the one. I visualise like that ballooning up. I'm holding all the threads.
Yeah.
I'm holding them together.
Threads.
Yeah, and I have to keep them.
Her life is in your hands.
Absolutely. Her life has been in my hands. And a few of her contemporaries have passed away from college, school to adult services because of the fragility of their lives. For some of them, that was on. For some of them, because they didn't have anybody fighting their corner. Yeah.
I remember I've worked with a number of, when I was at St Mary's, I worked with a number of couples and families where they had children, not exactly the same condition you, but, very profound disabilities where they couldn't speak or walk or feed themselves. And one of the things that became kind of very clear to me was that when your child can't speak, they take up a place in both the parents, the mother's and the father's brains, like asking them questions. Are you cold? Are you bored? Are you lonely? Are you loved? And that constantly in their minds, even when they're not with their children, it's like having a person that enters your brain because she can't speak for herself.
Oh gosh, she feels it entirely. And she shouldn't define me, I guess, but she does. She absolutely defines me. She's my every waking thought, really. Anytime any music, any sad music's on the radio, any love songs, anything. And I felt like I was, because I used to just curl around at that. She was me and I was her. Our breath would be the same.
She looks like you, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does.
That photograph, she looks very like you.
Yeah. She's beautiful. She's gorgeous.
She's so gorgeous. The other thing, and again, maybe this is me pushing too far, so do tell me to stop and we'll cut it from everything, is that with the families when those children have died, people have assumed there'd be relief. And that absolutely is not relief, because there's been such a central part of their lives. There's enormous loss. So there's the loss for the child they would have wanted,
absolutely,
as you've talked about with Lizzie. There's loss for that ongoing life that you would have had, which would have been much more independent and much more free.
Yeah.
But when that child dies, it doesn't liberate you. Like holidays still, people think you don't have to take all the kit and the chairs and the thing, because there's so much part of you. There's so much grief that isn't recognised because people assume it's going to be a relief.
Yes, I think that's very true. It is a difficult one to answer. And I've thought about it a lot. I've thought about how I would feel about that. But I think it is two griefs, really. I think it's that loss of your child and the love for your child, and then the loss of how the life would have been. Yeah, it's hard to think about. I think it's hard to think about, particularly when your child is small and young. But I think as that in adult services is a real jolt. It's like falling off a cliff with no support. And when we started in adult services, there wasn't even a transition social worker or anything like that. So it's like, how am I going to keep holding this up? I think one of the other things, so to go back to support, I think it's having your crew, finding your crew. There's a group of us all there were 6, well, unfortunately one of our dear friends passed away, 5 of us now, all with children with profound disabilities. And I think that's so important, that to have someone else who really gets it and who knows. Your team, it's definitely. And I think I said before, we had years ago, we had a get together, and somebody was late because it was had a hospital appointment. Someone else's child was having a seizure. Someone else was having a whiff of oxygen. Someone else's child was throwing food. But we all laughed. We howled with laughter because we're in it together. And we often say it's up shit creek without a paddle. We're in the same boats. This boat is just tipping all over the place, but we're in it together. And even now, we just know we don't have to. You don't have to give that whole background, and we just know where we're at, and we know who needs support when, and we know whose heart is being broken again when there's another medical crisis. And one of our group, her daughter did pass away, so we were all there for her.
That sounds so vital, is that having your crew of people who you don't have to explain. You're all living this double life in a way, your own life and then the life of your child with these profound disabilities.
Yes.
And that you can laugh, that you can take the piss.
Yeah.
Maybe otherwise you would
Gallows
permanently
humour,
be
yeah.
crying or losing your temper.
You
Yes.
definitely need a bit of gallows humour and a bit of dark humour that only we can do and only we can say. Because let's face it, people can never get it right, can you? They're damned if they do and damned if they don't, sometimes with grief anyways. Now, I remember once we were coming down in a lift, my son was only young and Lizzie was small. I think we must have had a chat with my son about the fact she might not live or whatever. And there's a little old lady in the lift with us and she was saying, oh, isn't she sweet? And my son piped up, oh yes she is, but she might die. And then this little old lady, the end I was having to counsel the little old lady and help her out of the lift when we got out. So yeah, it's definitely a difficult one. But I think also it's that thing about coping. It's making sure that Lizzie's known about and that people know she's existed. I did a talk for a conference to explain about Lizzie. She went to a college, and at the end, so I explained that when she was at school, we left a plaque, a print in the reception area, and it was two giraffes, a little giraffe standing on the back of a big giraffe, and it said, everyone needs a little help sometime. It was beautifully bright print. But what was most important to me was the plaque that I got beside it, which said, given with love and thanks from Lizzie Bailey, a pupil here, and with the dates, because I wanted people to know she existed. How would people know she existed? She doesn't do Facebook. She's not on Instagram. They wouldn't know she existed. And it was all about acknowledgement, being heard, and people know that she existed. And then at the end of the talk I gave for the conference, I said, and now 300 more people do know she exists.
Yeah. And talking to me here, I hope thousands of people know that she exists and telling her story and showing her picture. And there's something so vital about, isn't it, the acknowledgement of knowing that Lizzie may be having a very different life, that we don't see her. She's kind of constantly being cared for in her new home. So we don't see her face. We don't see her out in the world. She doesn't have friends. But you love her both as the child she is and the child you wish she would be. And you want other people to know her and love her as you do.
I do. I definitely do. And I think part of that is trying to make a difference for other people too. People who don't have a voice, who can't. I've been on committees, I've joined things. I haven't sat back and said, isn't it a shame we've got a disabled child? I've tried to make a difference for other people too. I guess part of making sense of suffering and meaning in suffering all the time, I'm trying to equate that. And I think I told you, like my bedtime reading, your book, Grief Works. I'm constantly searching and looking for that, about how other people have made sense of trauma in their lives and difficulties, and trying to work on that for me. And I think if I acknowledge that, it enables me to cope better. And if I can cope better, I can care better. I think that's the...
Yes, that's very profound, isn't it? That when you can find meaning, you can cope better. And then when you cope better, you can care better. So as my kind of final question, and it feels such a kind of tender, important conversation that we're having, what is the meaning that you've got to for today?
I probably mentioned to you before, I love quotes. I love meaningful quotes, not trite quotes. And I think there's one from Helen Keller. I think it says, the best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt within the heart. And I feel so much love. She's opened my eyes. She's given me so many gifts. And Lizzie herself is so here and now. She's not sitting thinking about any of this. She's just, all her behaviour is about what's happening for her now. She's pure. She's beautiful. The last bit of my letter that I wrote to her when she was 16, I said, I found some beautiful words to a poignant song. And the song says, if you had not have fallen, I would not have found you. Angel flying too close to the ground. And I close the letter, which says, well, my angel, I vowed all those years ago not to let you down, and I'm not about to start now.
That's a beautiful place to stop. Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you for
Julia,
introducing us to Lizzie.
Oh, thank you so
and
much.
That we do know her now.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to have that time to spend with you. And thank you for all that you give to everyone in the community. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Hello, Sophie and Emily. We're going to talk about this incredibly moving story of Heather's. And I think one of the most important aspects of it is actually is Lizzie's voice and her mum's voice, that we very rarely hear the stories of people who are profoundly disabled because they are hidden and are not heard. So I think just even listening to it again, having interviewed her, it just shocked me how rarely I ever hear a story like that or read about it or know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that really stuck out for me, is there was something about the invisibility of it, that they're existing almost like in the shadows, excluded from most things in society, like even just the sort of normal things of being able to go to a park, or when she was little, go to a play group, that even the sort of just existing in society is not possible. And how do you make those voices heard more loudly, which is why it was really fantastic to have her on the pod to speak for herself and her experience, and also for Lizzie and Lizzie's experience.
It also seems like Heather's been able to be an amazing advocate for Lizzie and for her needs, and that's been a huge part of her life's work, has been battling to get Lizzie's needs met. But for so many families, they don't necessarily have the support, the ability to advocate in that way for their children. When she talked about the move between children's services and adult services, and that several of the children died because they had no one to fight for their needs. And there's somehow something just profoundly shocking about that. I assume not shocking to people who are actually part of that community and very aware of that as a part of their reality. She had a voice and a partner, and it's still unfathomably hard.
Yes, and I think it also speaks to this constantly precarious existence, that you're aware that life exists on this knife edge in a way. That's something, that the vulnerability of it being so dependent, and how frightening that must be as a caregiver, that if you miss something, our brother has got a little newborn baby, and that thing that I remember so viscerally of like, okay, ooh, they're not breathing quite right. Should we take them to the hospital? Should we take them to that doctor? Like that constantly questioning when somebody isn't able to communicate with words what their experience is, that you are sort of constantly having to kind of make sense of that and live in this state of hypervigilance, really, because if you miss it, they're not going to be able to tell you. And that, the burden of that must be immense.
And the vigilance, as you said, of her having these episodes, multiple times a day, but also the kind of heavy lifting work of living with the loss of all that Lizzie couldn't be, and how to come to terms with no progress. She said progress looks different. And I think we're a society that is set up for kind of heroes and winning and recovery. I'm not putting myself remotely in the same bracket as someone who's completely able-bodied, but I think in society we're always looking for this kind of trajectory. If you get ill and you get better, and there's this winning that you do, you recover, you fight your illness. That is the kind of messaging that we receive.
And it's like from birth,
Goodwill.
right? Like the first experience is like milestones. Like, has your baby met these milestones? Have you got to this stage yet? And it's also incredibly linear. I think Western society is very like A to B. And I think when you are living with and caring for somebody who is profoundly disabled in the way that Lizzie is, it doesn't sound like there's an A to B. It's like you're riding the waves of what is right now, and being able to kind of just be in that space. I think it must completely change your mentality of what progress looks like, but also almost sort of having to exist in this quite mindful way of like, this is where we are today. Tomorrow might be completely different.
And it sounded like listening to her was somehow one of the ways that she has endured, is just returning to her love for Lizzie and her love for the family. That kind of anchors and has been a kind of engine to keep going, to keep fighting, because so many times she's had to sort of battle or fall down the hole, or it's become hard again. And that you could hear it in her voice, when she talked about her, how much she loves her and her son and her husband. But that sounded like the thing that kept her going, more than any sense of like, well, if we get there then, and if we get that next, which is often what we use to cope, is the idea that, oh, I'll just hold on till now and then it will get better.
And the next gate sort of thing. I really felt the power of Heather. And I also kind of want to acknowledge how we look for the kind of hero story. Like, she is a hero. There's no question she's a hero. And yet it's really important to discuss the wholeness, the cost to her of all of her, of what this was, that she spent years of being furious, looking at other families, seeing little girls of Lizzie's age, the resentment. And now, over 2 decades later, when services want to kind of ask her questions, a kind of ignition of fury, like, you didn't ask me when she was screaming in the bath and having another episode. It isn't like this shining story. It's dark and painful and
a slog.
difficult. It's a slog. And that thing I really sort of heard again when I listened to it, that thing of being left behind. You see people, like, we always have this idea, like you said, A to B, that would have this trajectory. She didn't have that. She was always left behind, and actually physically left behind when her sons went to parties with their dad, and that, I just don't know how you do endure that.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the fact you don't have a choice, and also, like Soph said, it sounds like the love for Lizzie and Lizzie's own personality, like I think she said at the end, around how many gifts Lizzie had given her as well. But there must be times where you feel like I imagine that you can't keep doing it.
And despair, that you fall into despair.
Yeah. And I also wondered about, the sort of inner life of Lizzie. Like, how do you work with the mental health needs of people who are really severely disabled? I haven't worked with this population, which I think is quite telling too. Like, how are people who are profoundly disabled accessing
And she's mentally as well as physically.
Right. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't feel or have moods or experience periods of feeling low and feeling happy, Like, I think that when somebody is really profoundly and severely disabled, I think our tendency is sort of somehow almost like a dehumanization, and to not think about, actually, this is a human who has human experiences and needs support with their emotional and psychological health as well as their physical health. It's not an area I know very much about, but just sort of looking at it, because I was sort of interested, having listened to Heather, it sort of seems like you are sort of looking at mental health from a perspective of sort of changes in mood that are much more subtle, so that you're sort of noticing, is this different over time? Like, is somebody much more passive or not eating as much? So you're looking at sort of
behaviors.
You're looking at behaviors.
Subtle,
right. So you're looking at, like, these are the ways that this person, this individual, communicates, and what do I understand from their communication.
Sort of reminds me of the work of Prouty, who talked about working with people who are often, I'm not trying to make a comparison here, not to be misunderstood, but people who are possibly in psychotic states or weren't talking or were nonverbal due to severe mental health, and that he would often work with them by mirroring or commenting on what he could see about what was going on for them. So he might say, "You're staring at the wall," or copy some of their postures, in the sense of, and it's just as you
mirroring.
Were talking, and I was thinking about mirroring, and then I was thinking about babies and non-verbal relating and empathy, and how those are sort of the non-verbal ways that we do it a lot anyway when we're not thinking about it, where we cross our leg. I often notice how, and try and tune it out when I'm with a client, how they cross their legs. I cross my legs. They uncross their legs. I'm like, you just can't help it.
Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe
yes, but I think it is a good thing. But it's trying not to become so aware of it. I'm thinking about it in terms of empathy, of relating to people who are non-verbal for whatever reasons there are. There are many ways that we can still seek to be curious and empathetic about their inner lives, and to show our attempts. Sometimes, often, just the attempts of being curious, even if you're not right,
it's your intention.
Is an intention, is in itself, as Emily said, is humanizing. It's saying,
like, I'm trying to
see you.
Yeah, what's going on for you? Is it this? Can I help with this? What's your internal experience?
And I think often what happens, and I'm sure I've done it, is that if someone isn't communicating, I sort of somehow take it personally and feel rejected. And so that shuts me down and I withdraw and retreat, which I think can often happen. And actually having that insight that you both talked about is really useful in that this wouldn't be about me. Like, put me down. But often we do feel that, like, okay, you're not going to talk to me, so that kind
Right. Or that you could sort of maybe just be so focused on the physical needs, which are obviously incredibly important.
or we have too much focus on words. I've got one more thing. So I think the wisdom I got from Heather towards the end of the podcast, and that this took her years and years and complicated, painful years, with moments of joy, obviously, and gratitude, was that meaning enabled her to bear the suffering, and that enabled her to cope better and care better. I mean, I think that's incredibly powerful and really hard to do.
Yes, that was the conclusion, wasn't it? Did you talk about Viktor Frankl in the interview? No, and it would. But
She
that
talked
was
about Helen Keller, and the best of the most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They have to be felt within the heart. And that kind of spoke to her so much.
It's beautiful.
That was also the sort of conclusion of Viktor Frankl, wasn't it, in Man's Search for Meaning? And he called it logotherapy at the end of his final chapter. And he was, for those who don't know, it's his book written after surviving the concentration camps during the Holocaust. And one of the questions he was trying to answer is, what enabled me to survive? And the answer for him was meaning. And part of his meaning was that he loved his wife. He didn't know if she was alive or if he was dead, but sort of one of the purposes of his existence was that he loved her. And he went on, I believe, to work with people with this view of, what really makes your existence meaningful. And it's not big, grand things of changing the world. It's just what's meaningful about your existence. And that is often who we love and who loves us.
Yeah. And I felt so moved by Lizzie. I feel kind of tearful. I just want to sort of make a final shout out that she exists. And then there's her plaque on the wall. And that I hope the people listening can remember her too, so that she is remembered.
Yeah. And known.
And known. That she matters. Thank you, Soph and Em, and thank you everyone for listening. We do love your comments, and if you have a friend or a family member you think this might be helpful for, do share it and rate and review, and do carry on listening to us. We really appreciate it.